Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. As we just heard there, South Korea's consumer prices soared at their fastest pace in more than 10 years last month, and analysts mostly blaming Russia's invasion of Ukraine for increasingly expensive energy and commodities. As we just heard in that report, a breakdown of the data provided on Tuesday showed prices at the pump surged more than 31%.
Yes, and as a result, the government will expand fuel tax cuts from the current 20% to 30% from early May through the end of July. The economic woes are also piling pressure on the Bank of Korea ahead of next week's rate-setting meeting. For more on the economic turmoil we're experiencing in South Korea, we connect to Oh Jun-sok, professor of economics at Sookmyung University School of Business. Good morning, Professor Oh.
Morning.
So firstly, on the government's decision to hike their fuel tax cuts to 30% for the next 3 months or so, in your opinion, was it the right decision, and will this have much an impact on us?
Yes, I suppose it was a right decision at the right timing, as less than expected. It would work. As a contingency plan to alleviate inflationary pressure, Korea will expand a tax cut on fuel consumption for the next 3 months at least, from the current 20% to 30%. This marks the largest tax cut ever applied to fuel consumption. The decision came as Korea's consumer price grew 4.1% in March from a year earlier, marking the fastest price growth in more than 10 years. In particular, the prices of oil-related products jumped 31.2%. Increasing price risks are caused by external factors mainly, including the crisis in Ukraine, higher inflation, and supply bottlenecks globally. Rising fuel prices have become a major concern, not only for retail consumers, but also for businesses, including commercial truckers. The Transportation Workers Union recently said the high diesel prices unfairly burden truck drivers because fuel expenses take on more than 30% of transportation cost. The price of gas used at home for cooking and heating will be raised to 3%, while the price of gas used for a small business will be raised 1.3%. Though it will be temporary, I might say 30% of fuel tax cut would work well for the time being to lessen the burden of high inflation and modulate the velocity of consumer price in the market.
Okay, and at a meeting on Tuesday, South Korea's finance minister came out and said the issue of inflation is the most important and graver than any other pending economic issue in South Korea right now. Do you agree with that statement? And what, if anything, can policymakers here to try and do to reduce its impact?
Big yes, at the moment, I agree. Complex inflation, combination of cost push and demand pull altogether are attacking our economy like a perfect storm. Consumer price grew more than 4% in Korea for the first time in more than 10 years in March, as energy price jumped amid Russia's invasion. Another gauge of core inflation, which excludes highly volatile prices of agricultural and petroleum products, gained 3.3%. It is the fastest climb since December 2011. As inflation pressure has built up due to the extension of the economic recovery momentum, the Bank of Korea expressed concern that inflation will be under more upward pressure going forward. This might be interpreted as the central bank start to be widely expected to continue tightening its money supply in the coming months to tame inflation. Monetary policy is not that enough. In addition to monetary tightening, it is also expected to counter rising costs, especially stabilizing raw material prices in the sourcing market. It might be needed as a policy option for the government to apply 0% of the tariff quota on such raw materials as aluminum strips, casting alloy used to produce secondary battery in automobiles, while securing additional supplies of wheat and corn through the alternative supply chains.
Now, Professor, inflation is putting a lot of pressure on the Bank of Korea to raise its benchmark interest rate even higher. In fact, they have to make that decision without in the absence of the governor. So do you think that the BOK would hike rates next week? And what about the rest of the year?
Not likely to increase rate next week, but I suppose they will hike interest rate in May. A cautious but repetitive adjustment, one by one, I mean that by 25 basis point would be forecast to the end of this year, depending upon the market movement changes. Since the consumer price inflation is projected to continue to the end of this year. Additionally, global supply bottlenecks, rises in energy and raw material prices are expected to push Korea's cost inflation higher than last year. It is true, in part, in the transition period of the COVID-19 pandemic into endemic, the Korean economy is forecast to continue its sound growth, supported by reopening of global economic activity and easing of domestic social distancing regulations. But there is a theory telling that interest rate gap between major trade partners should be kept. This means, in accordance with the interest rate decision of the U.S. Fed, Bank of Korea will stabilize the interest rate gap to restore the balance by increasing the rate. Depending upon the decision of the U.S. Fed, the Bank of Korea will increase interest rate. As a result, foreign exchange rate volatility will be widened in the foreign exchange market. In brief, it is projected while the goods market restores to the normalcy, financial market can hardly keep on their cruising direction to the rest of the year, surrounded by a chain of uncertainties.
Okay. As everyone's aware, here in South Korea, we're on the cusp of a new government. If you were advising President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's transition team on how to cope with soaring energy prices and inflation, what would you suggest?
Yeah, more than anything else, inflation. Inflation is the top priority. But if I got a chance, that I'd like three things to count in. First, monitoring financial market will be of great importance, in part to deciding and implementing tools for fiscal policy, in part to deciding the diplomatic policy. It is needed. Korean stock price will be expected to fluctuate depending upon the decision making for the time being, and the discount rate will be soared up in the both markets. So, in this sense, financial market monitoring should be needed. And secondly, a supply chain bottleneck of raw material and energy will become larger burden to the rest of the year. It is also needed from the risk management perspective to prepare for a supply chain monitoring system or early warning system globally among major industry to hold on the supply disruption. And lastly, energy diplomacy with the Middle East region in the frame of Korea and GCC FTA negotiation would be started. And then I might say that as a policy priority should be set on this kind of energy resource diplomacy.
All right, let's hope these suggestions could be heard by the incoming government. Professor, thank you so much for your insights as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.